I'd like to remind the audience that they can write their own questions just by raising your hand, and we'll come pass you a note card. But while we're waiting for that, I believe we have more questions to ask. Does anybody want to take the next one? Okay. What was the hardest thing to leave behind?
Mostly, I think, at any age would be to have to leave your home. And of course, from what I understand, everybody had to sell their home in 3 days or something like that, some ridiculous period of time. And in my father's case, he had to sell his business. Plus, they had to find ways of taking care of their properties. I mean, that is all your furniture and all your things that you possess, and of course leaving all those things behind, and or having to get rid of them. So the whole experience was very traumatic, and just having to go through that, pulling up your whole life and going to places where you don't know where they are, where you're going, and what's going to happen, and it was just a horrible time emotionally to deal with. So it probably, well, at any rate, it's just to me that's the most significant effect.
I just say ditto to my cousin George, and the only thing I remember is that my mother's family, my grandma and, let's see, two of her sisters and 2 uncles, they left a lot of their things in the Japanese Buddhist church, and they were one of the fortunate families that they actually got their stuff back and wasn't stolen by people. And sorry, that's it.
What I miss most, friends and classmates.
You know, my parents had been farming a very short time and had finally saved up enough money to buy a small rickety old truck. They were going to haul their own fruit to the market and save that money. And they were so proud of this truck. I was so dismayed when I saw this rickety old truck that they were so proud of, but they had to leave it behind, and I think that was a tough one. Aside from that, I want to tell you, I'm sorry I need to take this time because I'm so grateful still, but my mother she wanted us to have a finer edge, just a better chance at life. And so she had bought a little tiny piano. And we had just bought this piano. It was such a luxury to own this piano, and then we were evacuated. And so she left it with a neighbor. And just said, you know, would you keep this piano? The rest of the stuff we just put in the attic and stored away, but this piano was special. It was like a ticket to being finer, to having the art in our family. And so the person died while we were in camp. And when they died, they took her estate and they sold everything, and the relatives came and got things, and the piano was gone. So when we came back, I said, what about our piano? And my mother said, oh, you know, it's gone. It was left. She died, her son came and got it, and so it's gone. And we just accepted that. And I want to tell you, like 7 or 8 years later, after we had come home, there was a knock on the door. I gotta get through this little story here. And it was the son, and he had hired a U-Haul. He had gone to San Francisco, he had a tune, and in the piano there was a note from her. I still have this note, and it said, this piano belongs to Amy Hanada. She's being held, and he said, in a concentration camp, but it belongs to her, and it gave our address. And that man hired a U-Haul and brought it back to us and gave it back to us. I learned to play piano on that, my daughter learned to play piano on that. And it was just one of the nice things that happened. Now, I want to tell you one more quick story because it's poignant. And I had a Persian cat. I took care of a sick lady, and she brought me this. I didn't know anything like this existed. It was this little, like a pretend animal. I love this cat. We named her Chang. And so my big concern was who was gonna take care of Chang when you went, think of the pets that had to be left behind. So when we had people come to the house to interview, whoever petted Chang, I said, there's a candidate, and maybe she'll take care of it. So I didn't care about money, background, anything, but anyone who was gonna take care of Chang. So we chose this couple to take care of our home. And when I was in the camps, I wrote constantly. I had my mother write, my sister write, my dad write. We always had questions about Chang. Finally, we got a letter, and my mother said, okay, we've gotten a letter, Nancy, and I have some bad news to tell you. She's out of her misery. Chang is gone. She got run over, and so they said every time you write about her, it makes them sad. So no more writing about Chang. And I was so disheartened, but that ended it. Life goes on, and we came home, and I tell you, we were there just about a week, and we were laying on the patio, and this gray cat came. Chang was perfectly, beautifully white Persian. The gray cat was in such state of disarray. Its tail was stuck to its body with sticky weed. One eye was pulled over it because it was full of sticky weed. And so we were laying on, and it was like a miracle, a cat had come to live with us though. And so we were laying on the porch, and I looked at it, and as I looked at it, and my sister looked at it, I said, you know what, this is Chang. My sister goes running to my mother saying, okay, Nancy's being mean, she's trying to make us cry, she's making me sad. I said, I'm not kidding you, this is Chang, I can tell this is Chang. We combed her out, we undid everything, the eye was perfectly okay, it was just stuck down, the tail had just been matted against the body. This really was Chang. And our neighbor said that it had run away, they were mean to it, they shot it, they tried to, my neighbors were wonderful, they tried to lure it in. She said Chang became this ghost cat running in the vineyards, and they just put out food for it all the time, and it came and ate. So how Chang knew we had come home was one of the great miracles of coming home. And it took care of a lot of the hurts that were going on. But it's really a true story, and Chang went on to live with us as a full Persian cat for 7 or 8 more years after that.
How long were you gone?
3 years. 3 years.
I can't follow your great story, Dan.
So now a question from the audience. What was the biggest challenge when returning from the camps?
Trying to think of a time. We had a different experience from many people in the sense that there was some kind of program, I believe, I don't know this for sure, but in 1943, I believe, at least by 1944, my father was able to get a job in Cleveland, Ohio, and because he did have that job, then he was able to go back to Jerome, Arkansas, where we were, and take his family back or to Cleveland, Ohio. And so we stayed in Jerome only, the way I think, I don't know, I can't document this, but I think we were in Jerome for about a year, and then after that moved to Cleveland, Ohio until 1945 when the war was over, and then we went back to California. So what was the question? In any case, that was our experience, and that's how we dealt with it.
All right, the question was, the most difficult thing after returning. Well, since I was an infant, let's see, my mom and I were released from camp 1 year after we were interned because my dad was honorably discharged from the Army. And then George talked about Cleveland, Ohio. In order, I think, for my mom and I to be released, my dad had to have a job and be sponsored, so he, I think became a machinist in Cleveland, Ohio. That's when my mom and I joined him in Cleveland. But I can't really talk about much after that since I was just born. That's it.
What was the question again?
What was the biggest challenge when returning home?
Coming home?
Yes.
How do you get 11 people in 2 cars?
I'm so glad I'm not sitting on the end down there. It's so hard to be number 1 and number 2, and my mind is just going on. What can I say to them that would be of value? And, coming home, we dreamed of coming home. That's all we could think about was just getting home to our little farm. It was wonderful in Milwaukee, and we were there. We had friends there. People were wonderful to us. But just the thought of coming home, and we got down to 6 oranges. We were driving home. We were down to 6 oranges, and I remember my parents, they didn't want to stop. They were afraid to stop. We had heard all of these stories, and we were afraid to stop. So my father, he began to peel the orange, and he would pass the segments back to us, and he was eating the orange peels. So I said to him, when I realized that, I said, Dad, to have some of this oranges, I can't even enjoy it if you're eating the orange peels. And he said, oh, I like orange peels. That became a motto in our family. Whenever we didn't like something, we'd say, never mind, I like orange peels. We use that. But I want to tell you that the first day home, we were there, and I was reading letters that my father had gotten that said, don't come home for 6 months. Things are running high. So someone's brother was killed in the service, and I'm just telling you, Kay, this is not the time to come home, not yet. So we had all of these very frightening letters, and he had excerpts from them, and we delayed, but still we came home, but we were frightened. When we pulled into the home where I'm living now, the same house, the same yard, we could hardly wait, and our footlockers that we had all stored our things, the valuable things that they irreplaceable. My mother's wedding dress, her kimono, the ribbons my father won at the Tulare County Fairgrounds, showing his fruit, baby pictures, things like this. They were burning in the front yard. They had drug these footlockers down, and my father said, can you imagine the burden of wanting to, being so angry that you go to the trouble to drag footlockers down, force them open, and have them burning when the people come home. And my father was over there trying to put the flames out, and my mother so wisely said, Kay, it's just things. It's just things, Kay. So many times we would say that it's just things. So but it was a very unwelcome coming home after that big dream. So the next morning there was a knock on the door, and we were terrified, and because we had just gone through the footlockers being burned. And I remember wrapping myself around my dad's leg, thinking they won't hurt him if he's got a child with him. And he was trying to get me off, saying, Amy, take her to the back bedroom, take her to the back bedroom. So, and she was trying to make me be quiet. So I went to the back bedroom. I could hear this talking, hear this talking, hear this talking. And when I went back out there, this is really a true story. My father said, you're never going to believe who it was. And so we were like, who was it? Who was it? And he said, it was an honest to goodness live angel. And we said, now who was it really, Dad? And our neighbors were the Bianchis, and they were Italian, and their daughter was Blanche Bianchi. She became Blanche Rinaldi. And she was Italian, but she had this really frizzy blonde hair, and she just wore it all natural. And she was standing in the doorway, and the sun was behind her. So when it went on her hair, it just looked like a halo to him. And so he said she looked truly like an angel. And she came in with 2 bags of groceries. And she said, here's breakfast, here's orange juice, here's eggs, here's some bread, and do not go into town until we get home. When my parents come home from work, you wait and go into town with them. And it's just one of the memories that I had. And my father did become a lawyer. Blanche went to Europe, fell in love with the man she wanted to marry, George Rinaldi. My father was instrumental in helping write letters to bring him over here. He brought George Rinaldi over here, taught George everything my father knew about farming, and now George Rinaldi's son still leases our land. So, this tapestry gets so rich with what has happened and the equity that you have in real friendships like that. And you think when 2 bags of groceries, now, groceries come home by the cartload, but those 2 bags of groceries meant everything, and has just been the eternal lesson of what you do and how the goodness of people.
I agree with Madeline, you definitely need to write a book about it. So like many of the other panelists, my family went to the Midwest first before coming back to California. They went to Cleveland. My grandfather worked in a machinist shop and in a steel mill. And then they moved to Virginia, and then eventually made their way back to California, to Pasadena. They were fortunate enough, because my grandmother was born in Pasadena, to be able to own their house. And so when they got back, they found that there were people occupying it, and they had to hire lawyers to get them to leave. But they were able to get it back, and all of the extended family moved in with them. So along with my grandparents, there were her sisters, 3 sisters, and their kids, and her parents, and my grandfather's cousins. So it was a very packed house for several years until the community could get back on its feet.
I'd just like to mention just a couple of things, just as a perspective over everything. And one is that after the war, we virtually had to start over, especially my parents. And so that meant that my father had to establish and open a new grocery store again and start from scratch. So of course, that's a lot of work and a great challenge, and so he did do that. The other thing is what other of my contemporaries, my friends, and how they reacted for me coming back. And of course, I really didn't know anybody coming back, or to come back to. But right after the war, we lived in Sacramento for a while. Actually, Florin, which is a small town outside of Sacramento, and I went to the local school. And it's a typical country school where you have 6 grades in the one classroom, and so I was in that class. And I didn't really, or there were a couple of occasions, I think, where maybe somebody called me a name or something, I don't know. But there were so few students or kids in my grade, maybe there was 8 of us or something like that. So it's hard to really say, you make friends or get to know anybody that well. But fortunately, I was only there for a short period of time, and then we moved back to Oakland, and so there I got to be good friends with a neighbor boy who's my same age and all. But what happened when we would get in a fight once in a while, to make me mad, he would call me a Jap, knowing that I would really get mad at him for doing that. But he did that on purpose, of course, just to antagonize me. But as it turns out, he is my best friend. So, oh well.